This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman.
This is Will Friedle, the voice of the future Dark Knight, Batman Beyond.
And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 397 of the DCAU Review. I'm Liam. With me, as he always is Cal. Cal, after getting down and dirty in the muck of the DCAU last week with 2 more episodes of the Zeta Project, we have retreated to the serene, quiet beaches of Batman Beyond, and it's time for the second half of our re-review of the pilot episodes of this groundbreaking series.
That is right, Liam. It's a pleasure to be back here on safe and sound in the territory that, at least at this time in this universe, Zeta did not exist, or at least he was not known to our protagonists in this series at this time. We call this BZ, before Zeta. So yeah, it's great. It's great to be here, BZ, and we're excited to go ahead and talk a little bit about Rebirth Part 2, or 2 if we're, I guess, outside of the French-Canadian provinces. So yeah, excited to chat, pick things up where we left things off. As a reminder, we are looking back at this full episode. We originally reviewed it way back early on in the podcast, and we had some scores that we're kind of looking back and comparing to. Now we were off to an interesting start last week. It seemed to start out pretty sure that we're going to disagree with our final scores. Some regrets there about a couple of things, but interested to see with you if that continues on here as we get into this week's review of Rebirth Part 2.
Absolutely excited to get into that. We talked quite a bit in our deep dive re-review of Part 1 a few weeks ago about a lot of the history of the pre-production work that went into making this show, and some of the unique elements that were brought to it by some of the various creators and producers like Glenn Murakami, Darwin Cook, and of course Bruce Timm, Alan Burnett, and Paul Dini, the triumvirate that continued to work on this. And we have a few more notes that we'll pass along perhaps when we talk about the visuals and design of the show later on. But first, we will, of course, recap Rebirth Part 2. And before we get to that, I will present us with this week's IMDb synopsis for Rebirth Part 2, which, of course, is brought to us by the best way to support this very podcast, and that is at buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review.
That's right. Head over to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review. The petition to rename it Buy Us a Coffee, since there's 2 of us, has not gone through, not gained much traction. So it's still Buy Me a Coffee, although it is us, me, the royal me, I guess. Buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review is the best place to head today if you want to support the podcast, just as Liam said. And there's 2 different ways to do so. You can become a one-time supporter of the podcast. I got to admit it, I laughed. Our supporter of the pod, Zach, sent a message along this week saying that the highlight of last week's episode was me saying that we needed encouragement because we had to review Zeta Project episodes. So shout out to our supporter, Zach, who's a longtime supporter over at buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review. Always in there with a helpful, encouraging word. And Zach actually does support us and encourage us with a monthly support option, but you can join him at the monthly support option. We have 3 different tiers that you can join us at, including the Super Friend tier, of which Zach is one of our supporters. Zach is faithful with his support there and gets to enjoy the Super Friend perks, which is all of the normal perks that come with our podcast support, which include shout outs here on the air, some thank yous, exclusive access to our buymeacoffee.com site, and the ability to ask us a question about the episode that we'll be reviewing that week. And if we select it, you'll hear your answer on the air. So you can join Zach, or if you want to, maybe you just want to say, hey, great job. I love the Batman Beyond re-reviews. Keep them up. Love you guys. Something encouraging like that. You can become a one-time supporter of the podcast. Either way, we invite you, head over to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review, and please consider supporting the podcast today.
Absolutely, Cal. And so this is the official IMDb synopsis for Rebirth Part 2, which was written by Alan Burnett and Stan Berkowitz, directed by Kurt Gaeta, with music by Michael McQuistion and animation by Coco and Dong Yang. And that synopsis reads as such. Determined to bring his father's murderers to justice, Terry finally impulsively resorts to using Wayne's lost bat suit to investigate as the new Batman. I struggled with that more than that. Finally, impulsively back to back. That doesn't.
I like impulsively as like the adjective there, or the adverb there, but I think back to back there, two Lee words there.
Mhm.
Finally, impulsively. I feel like that's a grammatical no. So maybe should have considered at last or something else. Go ahead to the thesaurus IMDb synopsis writer and see us after
Absolutely.
class.
But we will get into our own plot recap from here. And after our previously on, where we recap part 1, where we see it left off with Terry returning to Wayne Manor and demanding Bruce get involved and review the contents of this disc that his father had left him. We open up in the Batcave as Bruce is reviewing the data and realizing that, in fact, it's true. Powers, and by extension, Bruce himself, by still being associated with the Wayne Powers company, is producing nerve gas, and not just any nerve gas, as we come to see, a tremendously deadly nerve gas, which of course makes Bruce furious.
It's worse than I thought. It's some kind of new DNA mutagen. Powers is making nerve gas. He's using my company to make nerve gas. Stay away from that.
Synaptic controls, neuromuscular amplification, flight capability. This thing might be old, but it's still cutting edge. Bet it amplifies your strength by at least 10 to 1.
I told you not to touch it.
But aren't you gonna go to...
No.
You built that company. And now Powers is making nerve gas there. You gotta do something. You're Batman.
I was Batman. Give this to Commissioner Barbara Gordon. Tell her I sent you.
The cops? They'll never be able to...
Do it.
Something happened to you, didn't it? And it wasn't just that you got old.
And so Terry leaves in a bit of a huff, quite distraught by everything going on. And right then and there, we see Derek Powers and Mr. Fix pull up in a hover limo and begin to threaten Terry, asking him to explain what happened to this disc and demanding that he turn it over. Terry does his best to fight them off, but he's overmatched. So he does produce the disc. And instead of handing it to Fix or to Powers, he tosses it away, gives Mr. Fix a swift kick for good measure, and is able to escape their clutches. However, Powers and Mr. Fix do, in fact, recover the disc. And so they'll let Terry live to fight another day for now. Although Terry also knows that he's in trouble with Powers now on his tail. We cut back to Wayne Manor, where we see Bruce walking around, and he hears Ace barking quite a bit. And as he looks out the window, he sees that someone has tied Ace to the front gate, preventing him from getting any closer to the manor. We see that Bruce has still got it when it comes to throwing. He still slings a mean batarang as he's able to throw one to free Ace. And as Ace comes running into the house, he runs right to the grandfather clock, the entrance to the Batcave, and begins barking. And as Bruce and Ace make it down the stairs, we see that the bat suit is missing. And that, in fact, finally, here, several minutes into part 2, Terry is finally in the bat suit. And he's on the hunt to stop Derek Powers all on his own. We cut back to Wayne Powers, where in the boardroom, we see that Derek Powers is meeting with the Kasnian Minister of Commerce, and they're discussing this new mutagen. Derek is showing the ambassador the testing process for this very powerful nerve gas.
It's the ultimate in germ warfare. A viral mutagen so quick-acting and completely invasive, no living cell can resist it. It all began with experiments on plants.
Impressive. But we're looking to do more than wipe out our enemy's crops, Mr. Powers.
Keep watching. This was our first experiment with livestock.
I trust the film puts to rest any lingering doubts, Mr. Higgins.
As you can see, the results are the same, even with animals.
And humans? You've tested it on them too?
The laws here aren't as liberal about that sort of thing as they are in your country, but we did have a little accident.
As we see, poor Harry did in fact not get the help he needed, as Derek had promised Warren in the previous episode, and so Mr. Egan is very interested in procuring this nerve gas for Kasnia, as he notes what it would be able to do, devastating any neighboring countries in the area around Kasnia, and so it seems they've got a deal.
That's right. So waiting outside in the Batsuit and listening in, eavesdropping on the conversation, is Terry, who was listening in using my favorite, or actually one of my favorite gadgets attached to the Batsuit, which is the microphones that are in the fingertips. So he's been listening in, eavesdropping in. He even happens to hear Mr. Fix mention that he's the one who rubbed out and took care of Terry's father.
I hope.
Yes, soon. Mr. Fix, any word on the kid?
Not yet, but they're looking.
I don't have to tell you how important this deal is to Wayne Powers. It's going to open up the entire Eastern Bloc for us, so I don't need it spoiled by a snot-nosed punk.
I took care of his old man, didn't I?
So we get that little bit of information shared there, and just as Terry's about to react, wouldn't you know it, the stormtroopers show up. I mean, the security guards for Wayne Powers show up. They've spotted Batman on the ledge. They've got him at gunpoint. They tell him that it's a little too early for Halloween, and Batman responds with his first quip of the new era, saying it's just in time for fall, as he falls backwards off the ledge, flying away, avoiding the shots of our soldiers. Batman flies around and ends up landing in some of the Wayne Powers loading docks. He's running around, being chased by a group of security guards. He hides out, and it's at this point that Terry begins to hear voices. But he's not gone crazy, at least not yet. It's actually the voice of Bruce Wayne, who is demanding that the Batsuit be returned. There's a built-in radio that we learn, a two-way radio, so Bruce is able to communicate directly with Terry.
McGinnis, can you hear me?
Who's that?
It's Wayne.
Mr. Wayne? Where are you?
There's a radio receiver in your cowl. Now listen to me, McGinnis. I want that suit back, and I want it now.
Now's not a good time.
That suit is not yours. You had no right.
Somebody had to do something, and you sure weren't about to.
I'm warning you.
And Bruce is not too happy that he's absconded with the Batsuit, demanding that he return it. Terry says he's not returning the suit. So just when Terry is about to engage in some hand-to-hand combat with a group of the security guards, he's handled them well. He's had some interaction here, one-on-one fighting with them, but just as it appears that he's got the upper hand and about to make mincemeat of this group of security guards, wouldn't you know it, the suit shuts down. It turns out Bruce has a kill switch that he can operate from the Batcave, and he lets Terry know, essentially leaving Terry completely vulnerable in the suit, unable to move, and he gets quite the beatdown from the Wayne Powers security team. They are just absolutely stomping him, pummeling him. Bruce is sitting there with hands folded in the Batcave with Ace watching on, and just listening. He hasn't activated. I guess the camera wasn't a function in this, or he decided he didn't need the camera at this point. He's just listening to Terry get the tar beat out of him with hands folded in the computer chair. So we hear Terry again taking quite the beating, and then ultimately begging for mercy for Bruce to reactivate the suit as one of the guards pulls out the gun and prepares to shoot it point blank range into Terry's face. Bruce hesitates, but ultimately turns the suit back on, allowing Terry to power back up with much excitement and able to take out this group of security guards and evade them, at least temporarily. More security guards are on the way, however, so Terry has to continue to evade them. Bruce suggests that in order to evade them, he needs to head to a broom closet, and also continues to instruct Terry to make sure that he knows he's to bring the suit back immediately.
McGinnis, I gave you a break. Now bring that suit back.
Love to, but I got these guards all over me.
There's a broom closet on the north wall. Can you get to it?
A broom closet?
Do it! Did you see him? Where is he?
This way.
Okay, let's go!
Now I'm a sitting duck. Hope you're happy.
The far wall. Put your hand against it. Press hard.
Cool.
I built the place, remember?
Then you'd know where they'd be loading a hover transport, wouldn't you?
Forget it. You're coming back here.
Powers is shipping out the virus tonight. It's gotta be stopped.
I'll call the police. Let them handle it.
I can do it.
I'll shut down the suit again. And this time, it'll be for good.
I read up on you, Mr. Wayne. I know how you lost your folks. The guy who murdered my dad is on that transport. This is my one chance to nail him.
The hover pads are in the northeast sector.
Wish me luck.
Good luck.
We then cut to that hangar where we see the last bit of the nerve gas is being loaded on. Mr. Fix is supervising, and Derek Powers is there on a phone call with another security agent saying after they were informed that this Batman sighting, which absolutely perplexed Derek Powers. He was laughing about it, and his security team assured him that it would be no issue. He's now a little bit more irritated as they were not able to stop this Batman character, and he seems to be a little bit more on edge, insisting that they hurry up so that the transport can leave, and that he doesn't want whoever this person is dressed as Batman to interfere. But of course, here we see Terry using yet another function of the suit. He has some electromagnets in the bottoms of his boots, which allow him to hang upside down, kind of like a bat. So we see him listening in, once again using the extended finger microphones, listening in on the call. But he is, however, not very well camouflaged in this very bright area. If you saw a man in a black suit with a giant red bat on it hanging upside down from a little overhang, I think that would stand out pretty well too. So he's unfortunately spotted by a group of security guards who begin shooting at him. Once again, Powers is alerted to it, insists that Fix gets on the transport, and then Terry begins trying to handle the security guards again. It appears that he's actually going to take on Derek Powers one-on-one, but with a sneak attack from behind is another security guard who has control of this. It's like a forklift, a futuristic forklift, essentially, that's controlled by robot hand. So it's both combining the power of the future in AI, but also the past from that old like Nintendo controller thing, that Nintendo glove that you had in the 80s that people wanted to love, but was really useless. So he's using that to attempt to crush Terry. Batman is able, however, to shoot a batarang out of his wrists, which knocks our pilot out and frees him. And then it's just Batman and Derek Powers as Mr. Fix gets in the transport and takes off. Powers does his best to stall Batman. He has a gun. He's shooting at Batman.
Shut the cargo doors!
Like shooting skeet.
Batman ends up hiding behind one of the remaining canisters that was not loaded on to the transport. Powers attempts to shoot at Batman, who has picked up one of the canisters, hurls it at Powers. Powers shoots at the canister, causing it to breach, and the gas to immediately start leaking out. Powers is covered in his own nerve gas as Batman flies out and begins to chase our transport in hot pursuit of Mr. Fix. And meanwhile, Powers is covered in the nerve gas, and we see his skin immediately begin to break out with the black boils that we saw ultimately took care of our dear Harry in part 1. Powers is also screaming bloody murder as we see Terry in hot pursuit of the transport, doing his best to stop it before it can get away.
That's right. We see Terry just dramatically being able to hold on we see that the bat claws made it over to this suit that we first saw. I guess that would have been in World's Finest. So Terry's able to latch on to the side of the ship as it's flying away long enough until he can get inside. Though as he's walking through the ship, he sees a bunch more canisters of the nerve gas, of course, and he goes to the pilot chair thinking he's going to confront Mr. Fix and get the drop on him. Unfortunately, Mr. Fix is one step ahead of Terry and sends him flying into the windshield of the ship using these cool electric brass knuckle things. And Mr. Fix wails on him quite a bit. There's a bit of a struggle as Terry is overmatched despite having the enhanced strength in the bat suit. Apparently, Mr. Fix is even stronger. We don't really get a sense if this guy's a metahuman or he's just really strong, but if he's strong enough to send a guy flying with one punch, maybe he's some kind of low level metahuman. Maybe he's a bang baby. We don't know.
I thought maybe I thought he was just a large Samoan guy. Like I just figured that in my head he's always just Samoan, and so he just had he just had built-in strength. He's a big, tall dude, like a monster. Yeah, just raw power.
I like that too. But so as Terry and Mr. Fix struggle in the pilot's chair, Terry is hit with an insult by Mr. Fix.
You're pretty strong for some clown who thinks he's Batman.
I am Batman.
As anyone who watched Kids WB back in the day, you know how Terry responds to that, as he declares that he is Batman, and that was used in like every promo for this show for like 5 years. So you're probably quite familiar with that line reading, maybe even if you didn't watch the show at the time. But yes, we see Batman is able to fight him off and knock him into the ship controls, which causes the hovercraft to fall towards the ocean. Several of the canisters become loose and start flying towards Fix. Terry is able to fly out the back of the ship at the last second as the ship goes crashing into the ocean. The water is filling up. We don't see any of the canisters break. However, the ship keeps sinking lower and lower and lower. And apparently the pressure causes the windshield to burst. And perhaps that is the end of Mr. Fix. And we'll talk about it a little bit later. But yes, we do see that as the end, as we see Terry has made it home back to his childhood bedroom the next morning. We see the bat suit tucked underneath his bed as he is getting some much needed rest after saving the world. And we hear his mother enter the room and tell him to get up and get dressed because they have a very special guest. And in fact, it's billionaire Bruce Wayne who has arrived to speak with him, which Terry's mother very excited about, knowing, of course, the fame of Mr. Wayne and all of his wealth and influence. And we get the scene, which I realized, I don't know if we talked about this when we did our original review, but I was like, oh, Civil War, Tony Stark, Peter Parker ripped this off, whether intentionally or not. As we see Terry open the door, and Bruce is sitting on the couch with his mother.
I hope you don't mind milk. We're out of cream.
I prefer it. Terrence, sorry to get you up so early.
It's okay.
You never told me you knew Bruce Wayne.
Well, actually,
Why, I owe this boy my life. He defended me against a bunch of hooligans once. I tried to reward him, but he absolutely refused.
Mr. Wayne wants to offer you a job.
a job?
It's not much, mind you. I find that in my old age, I could use a part-time assistant. You know, a gopher. Go for this, go for that. An ally, as it were. Would you be interested?
Well, of course he would. Wouldn't you, honey? I mean, to work with someone as famous as Mr. Wayne.
Sure.
I warn you, I can be a difficult taskmaster. I accept nothing short of excellence from all who work for me.
I think I can handle it.
Very good then, Mr. McGinnis. Welcome to my world.
And Terry accepts, and it's sealed with a handshake. The new Batman is here, and the old Batman gives him a firm handshake and a welcome to his world, as Terry is officially declared the new Batman, albeit silently, so that his mother doesn't know about it. And you'd think that would be the end of our adventure, Cal. What a way to go out. But wait, we get a little postscript. Speaking of Marvel, we got a post-credit scene-esque scene here as we cut back to Wayne Powers, and we see a bunch of scientists in hazmat suits informing Derek Powers that they were able to stop the spread of the virus that he was exposed to in that nerve gas. However, the virus has mutating powers and or has mutating capabilities, and it usually combines with whatever the environment it is exposed to. In this case, heavy doses of radiation.
The good news is the radiation seems to have completely eradicated the virus.
What's the bad news?
As you know, the mutational properties of the virus can be corrupted by its environment.
Bottom line it, Doctor.
Kill the radiation, please.
You see that, Derek's got himself one hell of a sunburn as he has turned into a green, glowing, translucent skeleton. And as he sees himself in the mirror, he begins to laugh uncontrollably, this maniacal cackle. And then he turns toward the camera as we see that he is he's, as one might understand given the circumstances, he's losing it a little bit as he reveals this. And so that's our big reveal. Derek Powers does survive, but with this new horrible radiation skeleton look, which we will come to know as Blight in future episodes. Spoiler alert. But yes, Cal, that will wrap up our plot recap. We can start talking about our old scores from our original review and also what we thought. So this part two, I think it's fair to say, we talked so much about how part one was it's all set up. We're all putting the pressure against the spring.
Mm-hmm.
And then this episode, by the result of all of that work that's done in part one, this is pretty heavy action.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Terry getting the suit, Terry fighting the guards, Terry fighting having the standoff with Powers on the docks, and then having his big showdown with Mr. Fix. So it's all kind of centered around action much more. There's less room for those character beats that we had in part one, but still, I think it leaves you with a pretty strong, as far as being the anchor point for everything that would come after it, the Derek Powers of it all, and how he's going to fit in as the sort of Norman Osborn, both he's this ruthless evil businessman and also he's going to be a supervillain in his own right. And then also you now have it established that that Terry impressed Bruce enough that Bruce is willing to sign off on someone else being Batman going forward. It's a good finishing point, but as far as the episode itself, when we're looking at it just in this little vacuum, it's a lot of punching and flipping and laser blasters and gas canisters, I guess.
Yeah, I think the main story beats here are kind of sprinkled throughout. You kind of have to really be going through it with a fine tooth comb, kind of how we are. I think, yeah, the majority of what we get in this is the fighting between Terry and the Wayne Powers security team, and then his little fisticuffs with Powers himself, and then his final battle with Mr. Fix, and that's the crux of our action, which takes up the final 13, really the 13 minutes or so it feels like. But some of the other stuff that we do learn here, obviously we learn a little bit about what Terry is going to be like as Batman. So we do see that he's willing to be quippier and snarkier. That will of course, that's later called out by the Joker in Return of the Joker, about how this Batman likes to talk. Like, he actually likes to engage in witty repartee with those that he's taking on and do some taunting and smack talk. So we see that very early on here, where he's giving quips and kind of taunting the guys that he's fighting. He even tells Bruce, when Bruce screams over the intercom to bring back the suit, he says, "No thanks, having too much fun." So we get a couple of things revealed there too, which is Terry actually really enjoys this. And I don't know that you ever got that impression with Bruce's Batman. Like, his goal is to fight crime as a tribute to his parents, right? That's what he swore the oath. We see how that affects him psychologically from Mask of the Phantasm all the way up through the end of the New Batman Adventures. Like, this is a job for him and something that he takes very seriously. Terry kind of enjoys being Batman. He likes the idea of being a hero, and we get little glimpses of that here. As soon as the suit has come on, he's enjoying the fact that he gets to chase down the bad guys and fight these security guards off and play a little bit of cat and mouse with them and drop boxes on their heads. And the fact that he mentions some of the powers of the suit that we'll talk about in just a moment in visuals, but like the fact that he has his strength enhanced and is able to use some of these little gadgets that enhance his ability to be a detective. We get to see him be a little bit of a detective here too, which I feel like is a big portion of what we see later on in the series, with Terry kind of fitting that mold of the world's greatest detective. Bruce kind of has to hone some of those things in, and him being the voice in the chair certainly does give Terry that resource of somebody who has more experience and treats this a lot more seriously at times than Terry does. But we do see Terry here on his own without Bruce's help, kind of doing some of the detective work and trying to gather evidence and figure out who's behind what, and ultimately discovers that Fix is the one who killed his father because of that. So I like that, and that's kind of mixed in there. And then obviously the bookend that we get with Terry finally being accepted with Bruce after Bruce is finally impressed. That we don't really get to see what the conversation was once Terry escapes the ship as it hits the water. But I would be interested in what that was like once we know he didn't return the suit, because the suit's under the bed when his mom comes in. But what that conversation was like. Did he have a conversation with Bruce? Did Bruce yell at him to bring the suit back still? What did that look like before Terry hit the hay that night? I would love to have known what that looked like. But the fact that Bruce shows up there, Terry feels like he's a little cautious at first as to what's going to happen, and then ultimately we see the acceptance of Bruce finally kind of taking him under his wing, pun intended here, to be the next Batman. Is a really neat way to do that. And as you mentioned, the Marvel, the precursor to a Marvel post-credit scene here, a pre-credit scene reveal of our big bad and his transformation into this maniacal supervillain whose exterior now matches his ruthless interior is pretty awesome too. So yeah, in a vacuum, if we're just reviewing this episode as it stands on its own, and we talked about this I think when we reviewed World's Finest, it's very difficult when you take a hour long or an hour and a half long presentation and you try and break it down into parts. Obviously, that's what they had to do for broadcast or rebroadcasting this, which is why we split it up into two parts. But I think as a whole, looking at both parts, which is why when we started reviewing part 1 and part 2 in separate episodes, we made the decision like, hey, we're gonna review it still as one entity. We're not gonna try and break up per episode and give scores that way. If it's a two-parter, it gets one score, and that's how it'll be, because really it is hard to break up even the episodes that were intended to be two parts. It's hard to break down those episodes and give individual scores, because we know what happens at the end. We know kind of the way that the story goes, and because of the way that these stories are written, they are very front heavy with the story and back heavy with the action. So you're kind of missing some of that. So yeah, if we had to score this as a standalone episode, the plot may be like a 6 or a 7 for me. But I think looking at the episode as a whole, I would have been hard pressed not to give this a 10 out of 10, just because it is so impressive. I think my original score was a 9. So, I think I would probably, I'm splitting hairs there, but I don't know why I wouldn't give this a 10. I don't know what I wouldn't have liked about it, because ultimately it is a pretty awesome introduction to this character that had to do a lot to introduce this futuristic world and want people to come back and be interested about the next steps. And I feel like that the way that you ended this with Bruce and Terry shaking hands, and what that means, them being partners in fighting crime, and then the reveal of what happens to Terry's father's killer ultimately, or the person behind the killing of Terry's father, is a great way to entice people to come back.
Totally agree. Yeah, it's such a strong starting point. Obviously, it's the pilot episodes. You want it to be sort of a mission statement for what the show is going to be. But also, yeah, like they spend time showing that, like, Terry, while he is very tenacious and he's smart, to your point, he doesn't understand how the suit works. Like, he doesn't figure out how to throw a batarang until like very late in the episode. And then he kind of starts to spam that until Derek Powers shoots one out of the air, and he's like, "Oh, I have to think again." Like you see him sort of learning the suit, or how difficult he's having flying and things through the city. He almost overshoots a building, and and the wing, he's not retracting the wings as he lands. Like, they're kind of hanging out on him as he's climbing, across rooftops and ledges and things like that. So I love the idea of him figuring out the suit as he goes, and then also almost figuring out the technology. Maybe he becomes a little over reliant for it on a second, until he realizes that he has to still be smart, and he has to still be able to think on his feet, which is a lot of fun, as you see in those sequences where he's taking on the different guards and the big bulldozer thing with the control arm guy. But yeah, so I love seeing him thinking, and then at the end when he's fighting, they establish how he's much stronger in the suit. They say the 10-1 or something like that, and enhances your strength. But then he's fighting, as you mentioned, this big wide mountain of a man who is overpowering him, and he can't just pick this guy apart and slug it out with him, and he has to kind of again think about it and use leverage and use tactics to kind of outsmart him and use his own weight against him. So I like how you see how Terry is, while he is very much he'll definitely be the guy to throw the first punch, he is still able to think on his feet, and he's kind of figuring it out as he goes. So I like seeing that as a way of showing his struggle. Yeah, and I just think it's really strong there. And then to have that moment where and we'll certainly talk about this more in voice acting, I imagine, but the final scene in Terry's apartment with with Bruce, and him having this very coded conversation in front of his mother is great fun. As this sort of spy espionage side of this, the double life that he's now going to be leading, and them sort of coming to this agreement at the end there and shaking hands is a great way to end it. And like we said, we get this little postscript with Blight setting him up to be our big bad for this first season. So it's such a strong start. Yeah, I think it would be really difficult, like you said, for me to give this anything other than a 10, especially if we, as we did previously, we were scoring both parts together.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, this second part is way more action based and there isn't as much emotion and character beats and all that, but it's still strong. And even the moment, like, Terry appealing to Bruce by pointing out that, Bruce never got to catch the guy who killed his parents, but now Terry has a chance to sort of right that wrong. And what's more Batman than that, right? It all comes down to the death of Bruce's parents, which is what spawned all of this. And so, and the way that their death and their killer never being brought to justice haunts him even in his old age. And so that being the moment that appeals to Bruce enough to go like, okay, I can't do this for myself, but I can give this kid closure that I'll never get to have, I think is quite good. And we see that in the same way that he sort of dealt with with Dick as Robin and with Tony Zuko, or even you could say with Tim and Two-Face to an extent. So I think you see that sort of reflected in him, and and seeing not only maybe some old partners of his, but also himself in Terry, and that it's really his humanity and his that yearning for justice to be served is still in there, even as his he's become this old bitter man, as we talked about in part one. So yeah, I think even though it's very action heavy in part two, it's all built off of that strong emotional foundation that we see in part one. So it would be hard pressed, I think, for either of us to give this anything other than a 10, it sounds like. But as we say, we must adhere to the rules we have made up for ourselves, and we will not be changing our original scores,
which were 9 and 7, by the way. I gave it a 9 and you gave a 7. That's why I'm like, yeah. I mean, this is one of those cases where, yeah, I'm splitting hairs with a 9 and a 7. But if I recall, and I'd be curious, this is something that stuck out to me. If I recall, and it may be misremembering because this was over 350, 70 episodes ago or whatever it was that we reviewed this episode. But I feel like you maybe had something, and I know since then you've had an issue with this, which is why it sticks in my memory. But the idea of you're not a fan of I'm not going to kill you, but I don't have to save you, Batman type of.
That's true.
Type of reaction. You're not a fan of the way that the Batman Begins movie ends. With that decision, I think you've expressed that doesn't feel very Batman. And here, while it's not quite that, that he, has the decision to save Fix or not, he does ultimately let Mr. Fix die here. So does that maybe a cause for not necessarily liking how that scene resolves? Or to me, I don't know, my thought process would be he's still figuring this out. He doesn't ultimately kill him. And it's more of a split decision thing, like, hey, I need to save my butt. I'm getting off of this thing as it's going down. Every man for himself versus I'm going to save this guy and let justice handle the situation here.
Yeah, I think in my heart watching it this time, even though Bruce is being, I think at the end of the day, he wouldn't have let Terry die, even though he claims he would have. I feel like in the same way that we would see Batman dangle a thug off of the roof and act like he was going to drop him to scare him. I think ultimately he wouldn't have stopped him. He maybe wouldn't have helped Terry. He maybe wouldn't have told him where to find the docks and all of that, and in time to stop Powers and Fix. But so I think you do see the confliction, but I do think it's like that. It's that stubbornness, because he knows almost from the moment that Terry first appears in his life and he tells him, you've got to do something, you're Batman. It almost feels like Bruce is, I think, trying to convince himself that no, that's all behind me. I can't do anything about this. You just have to let the police handle this. And so I think, I mean, I think we talk about this. We spend a lot of time in our lives, I think, trying to convince ourselves of things sometimes, even when we know perhaps they aren't true. And so as much as Bruce wants to say that I don't care about this, we have to just let this go, let the cops deal with it, let the chips fall where they may. That chapter of my life is over. I think you hear that. It's, again, I think we talked a little in part one about maybe some of the DNA that this old Bruce shares with the Dark Knight Returns Frank Miller Batman, where it's that feeling of he's like, oh, I'm retired, I'm just an old man waiting to die now, but there's that voice in his head that says, like, you're not done yet, and and he's almost fighting with himself, I think, in that scene. And ultimately, but I do think at the end of the day that he wouldn't have let Terry down. So,
but what about when it comes to Terry with Mr. Fix, though? Because Terry is faced with that kind of the same decision there on whether or not he wants to save. Like, he lets Fix die, he lets him drown. So is that the same thing as the Batman Begins ending for you?
I think it's a little different because it happens so quickly. I would liken it more to like Batman and Superman letting the Joker blow up on the wing.
Okay.
Where it happens so quickly. Terry has the decision of, like, the place is filling with water. He's got to get out, or he could probably drown too. And it's more of a self-preservation thing than he doesn't stand. It's not like later in this series when the guy's falling through the floor and they just let him go to the center of the earth.
Right. Yeah.
That one I remember having a big problem with. So I think I definitely see what you're saying. It definitely does feel similar in that maybe I wish there could have been a bit more of Terry being conflicted about the fact that he let him, that he wasn't able to save him, even as we know he's his father's killer. But we don't see him. We cut away so quickly. We don't really see like that he's happy about it either. So I guess I think the cutaway maybe saves us. If we cut to a shot of him flying and smiling, which I think does exist in the tie-in comic. Actually, the tie-in comic version of the story does have him flying away with a big smile on his face. Maybe I'd feel differently, but thankfully that moment didn't make it into animation, so I can preserve in my head that if he'd had a few more seconds, if he was a bit more experienced as Batman, maybe he would have tried to save Fix, but instead he basically just pulled, by pulling out the wings and flying out, he basically just pulled his parachute to save himself.
That makes sense.
We will move on to our second category, visuals and animation. We'll see how we feel about our past scores in this category as well. But once again, we have Kurt Gaeta as our director for this episode, and Coco and Dong Yang as our animation providers. Cal, so we have a few pre-production notes. I think we had maybe missed talking about in part one, and also this is obviously a very big visual episode because it's so action-packed. And crucially, as we said, finally Terry is suiting up in the bat suit, so we get to see what this Batman will we see old Bruce in the suit briefly, but now we get to see what this Batman, the real Batman of the future, is going to look like going forward. So this is a big one for our visuals and animation category.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'd be remiss not to start with, we had so much stuff to talk about last week. We didn't really get to nail everything, and we obviously wanted to talk a lot about the pre-production as much as we could with the show coming together. So make sure, if you haven't listened to that one, I don't know why you'd listen to part 2 before part 1, but make sure you check that out if you want to hear some of our thoughts and some of the lovely tidbits about how the show came together, the story of its past and how it came to be, if you will, to coin a phrase. But yeah, I think it would be very interesting just to briefly talk about the opening credits for Batman Beyond, because to me, this so much about the opening credits define what this show is and differentiates it from its predecessors, whether that's the new Batman Superman Adventures, Superman the Animated Series, Batman the Animated Series. all of them or both of them have very memorable intros. It's one of the hallmarks, obviously, of almost every DCAU show, I think, with the exception of Zeta. Every one of the opening credits are pretty memorable for good reason, and that is they typically tell you a little bit of a story. And it's interesting because, as we talked about last week, this is the birth of a new thing. This had never been done before. There was no Batman Jr. There was no Batman of the future. Well, there was probably a Batman Jr. in the Dick Sprang era. if I had to wager a guess, one of those comic covers at some point along the way in the 50s had Batman Jr. show up. But notwithstanding, we didn't have a Batman Beyond. We didn't have a Batman of the future to really talk about. That was really hammered out here. So especially not in cartoon form. So from the opening credits, I think it really defines what this show was going to be. They didn't reuse any clips. It is a very unique in and of itself intro. So very much like Batman the Animated Series, that wasn't just clips behind music. And obviously Superman the Animated Series used some original animation and some clips from the show to accompany Shirley Walker's theme. But in this case, as we talked about, the Smells Like Creamed Spinach, I think is what the original title of the song was. That beautiful piece that comes running in here, along with shots of, I think, what was preliminary artwork for what some of the designers, Bruce and Glenn Murakami and some of the other artists that worked on the original design work for the show, kind of this crawling, sprawling shot of this futuristic Gotham with this running bass line that's put through this, this distortion effect before the drums start coming in, until eventually we see this shot of Batman, the new Batman, on top of a building in front of the moon with this absolute incredible cacophony of bats just flying through the purple night sky as this driving guitar plays. And then some of the individual elements that were included here, including I didn't mention, but Glenn Wong and a little guy by the name of Darwin Cook, who you mentioned earlier on, but one of the most legendary artists probably of the last 30 years or so, that ended up, sadly passing away a few years back, but really ended up with a incredible defining art style that was very adjacent to the Batman the Animated Series, Bruce Timm, and obviously all the artists that influenced Bruce Timm style. But he actually worked and is credited with doing the intro here, and some of the elements are I feel like so ahead of its time. That shot of that three-dimensional Bruce Wayne turn, which feels like it was done with 3D animation if you look at it, but it isn't. It's actually a Lazy Susan with a three-dimensional bust that Glenn Wong created, just spinning it around with some filters over top of the camera, and that's used a couple of different times. And then there was, I think, preliminary animation, the shots of Batman in black and white kind of doing kicks and stuff like that, with some of the original preliminary animation that they had kind of done and sent in, and all of that's kind of placed over top of these original drawings of Dana, and these words that are splashed across, these really like negative words, apathy, greed. And then eventually we get to justice, and we get Batman after Batman's brought in. It is a instant classic for an intro that, again, I think defines what this show is going to be. By the time the end hits, you get the last guitar riff, Batman's hands go up with the wings attached, and then it fades to black, and then you get your title card with whatever the title of the episode is. You kind of have an understanding, I feel like, of what this show is all about. You get the grittiness, you get that it's set in the future, it's a Batman show, you know what you're going to get from this. But while it links a little bit to the past with the DCAU Bruce, this is kind of a whole new ball game that we've entered here, from everything with the music matching with it, and then these really neat visuals. So yeah, I love this intro. I don't think I willingly, unless I'm in a rush, I don't skip. This is one I don't skip ever.
Yeah, it's just such a work of art, and we kind of talked about it a little bit, I think, musically last week about how the transition from that opening scene in part one of Bruce, it's a very even other than Bruce, the drama of the scene of Bruce having the health issues and everything, it's pretty standard fare. It's action and musically, and then you fade to black on that never again, and then that theme kicks in, and it's so jarring in a good way, both visual, we've talked about it musically, also just visually. It feels so different, it feels so cutting edge at the time. It feels very sort of underground, like punk feel to it, which obviously was also in the music as we talked about. But yeah, all of these flashing images, these words, these different images, to your point, the fact that there's not a single ounce of CG, whether it's the Blight skull or the shot of Batman surrounded by the Jokers, and kind of all the very old school camera tricks they used, as you mentioned, to pull off those images is so cool, and it's so striking. And it, again, you talk about a tone setter, which we've been talking about these whole two parts. It's about setting the tone for the whole series, and my goodness, does this opening sequence visually set the tone for what this series is and how different it is from a color palette state, from a design state, to anything we've seen from this same creative team before, whether it was Batman or Superman or the new Batman adventures. So yeah, just an incredible visual spectacle, and it's all moving so fast, but it never really feels disorienting. And yes, some truly iconic shots that you still see reused in when we still get Batman Beyond merchandise quite frequently today. We still see those shots from this opening sequence kind of homaged and reused. So just incredible work. And as you mentioned, Darwin Cook on the title design for this, along with Shane Glines, Bruce Timm, some of the other people that worked on it, just absolutely phenomenal.
You say it's often homage, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think even most recently in the Static and Batman Beyond crossover comic in the DC main continuity, legendary DCAU artist Ty Templeton did a cover, and I believe Batman is in that same sort of wings, arms up pose that he finishes the title sequence in on that cover as well. Yeah, so still being homaged today, even by the former DCA. I mean, leave it to a former DCAU artist, the legendary Ty Templeton, to homage the series itself with that look. But yeah, it's just iconic, and one of those things that I think we like, if we were in some weird universe where that was all we got, we never got an actual show like that. That would just be people would think of it as a masterpiece. It's a work of art. It's yeah, all the people that worked on that, incredible stuff.
Absolutely. And yeah, as elsewhere, I think everything looks good, feels pretty visually fluid as far as the animation itself goes. Like you said, got a lot more action in this. You get to see the suit. I know you already touched on it in our plot recap, but the fingertip microphones, really just one of the most ingenious and coolest looking visual elements of this high-tech bat suit.
Yeah, it's my favorite, I think. I think it's my favorite tool, and he ends up using it a handful of times throughout the series, obviously. But the shot that we get of kind of introducing the viewers to what this is, the shot of the fingers pressed up against the glass, the little wires that are kind of running through it, the red wires, and then kind of linking it. You get the next shot is of the cowl's ears, so you can, all right, this is feeding sound directly into the hood for Terry. It's really awesome. Yeah, the gadgets, and that actually one of those features that I think was on one of the DVDs with the interviews with our creators, the laundry list of people that we talked about last week: Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, Alan Burnett, Dan Reba, Kurt Gaeta. They were all on that, talking about the suit. Even the late great Dwayne McDuffie and also James Tucker were in that being interviewed as well. But they talked about the suit in and of itself and some of the decisions that went into not only the visual design of the suit, but how the suit functioned. So some of the interesting things that I remember them talking about, I think we touched on it briefly last week, but the idea of it being a completely all black suit made the most sense. He's able to blend into the shadows. He's kind of one with the shadows now at this point. They do talk about how they eventually introduce the invisibility function and that, but of course he doesn't use that in the first episode here. But as far as the suit itself, but then also having this bright red bat across the chest that stands out, which not only obviously identifies this for kids who, again, I cannot believe that the target audience for this episode, where we witness multiple character deaths, people being exposed to nerve gas, and parents of teenagers being murdered, was geared for a 5 to 8-year-old audience. But sure, that's what the story is, or 5 to 12-year-old audience. Sure, okay. But obviously that giant red bat easily identifies to your viewing audience, this is Batman. He doesn't have the typical Batman suit, but you can identify him clearly there. But also they talked about how it was almost used as like a warning for the adversaries to Batman. It was like a big red blood splotch across the chest, similar to how a warrior would like warn somebody in Rambo or something of like, don't mess with me. I'm covered in my blood or somebody else's blood. Who knows? But the idea that's the warning sign to the villains that would dare cross Batman, I think is pretty awesome. They also talked about, of course, the gadgets, and you already mentioned it. We get a little bit of the dialogue explaining here as Terry's going over it. He talks about how it's old but still cutting edge. I like that. So we know obviously it was old enough that Bruce was using it, but cutting edge enough where it's not completely outdated. We get some exposition that explains why Terry's lack of actual traditional Batman training, like he's not going all across the world and learning martial arts in Japan, or learning from Ra's al Ghul or whoever, whatever your preferred Batman backstory is. He's just a high school student that is a brawler. He likes to brawl, and now he's got a suit that enhances his strength 10 to 1. And oh, by the way, it has flight capabilities. They talked about in that featurette, Batman doesn't fly typically, but you know what? If Batman's going to evolve in the future and use technology, yeah, now he's going to fly. He's not going to fly like Superman can fly. There is a gliding aspect to the way that he flies, and we see that in that sequence where Terry first puts on the suit. We see he's having quite some trouble trying to glide without the use of the rockets in the boots, but it makes a lot of sense. I feel like there was actually a lot of thought that went into how the technology would evolve going forward, and keeping it still rooted in Batman, but an evolved Batman to adapt with the technology. So the things like the batarangs coming out of the wrists make a ton of sense. He doesn't have to use a traditional utility belt anymore. These things are compacted somewhere within the gloves. That we see the claws, as you mentioned too, that were introduced, that links back to the DCAU World's Finest, as you pointed out. So he's using technology that he already had at some point. He's used whatever modern technology has continued to advance to create conveniences for what Batman would need in a futuristic fight to make him more effective, but also still feels authentically Batman. The one thing that they talked about was, hey, he's not going to need a cape anymore. Like, he's not going to wear the cape. Like, that's the only thing here that really kind of separates him from a traditional Batman, that he doesn't have the cape. He's got the wings, of course. And I think that's a fun compromise there. But I think also this is a good segue, and feel free to talk about any of the suit things that you didn't like. But the all black without the cape, I think, feeds right back into the DNA of Spider-Man being in this in this suit so much. I think there's a sequence when Terry first wears the suit and he has this interactions with the security guards. He's standing up on top of like a ledge, kind of talking down to these security guards, and he's doing the Spider-Man stance. He's like knees bent, kind of half crouched, with his hand placed between his legs, touching the ground in front of him, or touching the ledge in front of him. And I was like, that's peak Spider-Man pose. They're not even trying to hide it. So I love that this just feels like The Spider-Man DNA is there if you want to see it.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's not so over the top that it's that anyone's gonna get sued, but it's as you said, it's a great way of phrasing it. It's so in the DNA of this character in this show, and as we said, the whole episode being him, running after the guy who killed his father is it's all very Spider-Man in that way, and striking out his zone as this teenage superhero. It's all right.
He even
Right
gets to
there.
hang upside down
The-
like Spider-Man for that bit.
That's right. Yes, as you said, a bit. They do try to make it a little bat-like
Yeah.
in the way he's kind of hanging with arms at his sides, but it is still, yes, to your point, still, a lot of skulking around and crawling and crouching and as you said, kind of attaching himself to surfaces. So lots of Spidey for sure in this. Yeah, the suit itself, again, it's so simple that you'd almost think it wouldn't work. Like I can imagine that being a discussion, especially for a show that's supposed to appeal, as we talked about, the whole pitch of this show that Warner Brothers wanted was a show that would appeal to younger children. And so you'd almost think you'd want to go more colorful, more kind of outlandish and over the top if you're going to do a show that's going to appeal to younger kids. So the fact that they went so sleek and simple with the suit, I think is it was a really inspired choice. And it looks great on screen. You don't even really, you do have, depending on what he's standing up against, you do have like a slight highlight color, like a grayish highlight color, some cell shading on him, but honestly just the jet black of that suit with just the red, the red of the bat and I guess the little gray utility belt to kind of break it up a little bit, I think is really inspiring and really inspired as far as like just it's a very minimalist design, but it works perfectly. And it still feels, and I think crucially, which is an element when you're changing so much, including who's wearing the cowl, to still look at that image and go, oh yeah, that's Batman. Like you feel it. It's just one of those things, you know it when you see it, as they say. And I feel like it's like, yeah, it still feels like Batman, even though it's so far removed from anything from Bob Kane or Bill Finger or Neil Adams or any of those classic artists that inspired Bruce Timm and all of those folks who worked on these shows. So yeah, just again, as we talked about with the series itself, it's a big swing to go that different, but man, if they didn't just hit a complete home run with it. So
I like retroactively, obviously this is 99 when this episode debuted on January the 10th, 1999, as we talked about last week in prime time. And so this is before production was even starting on Justice League, which didn't debut for another 2 years. But the fact that Batman's costume in Justice League, the design for that looks like an evolution. Like the new Batman Adventures, his ears are definitely longer than they were in the Batman the animated series run. And then we see they're even longer, and some of the other elements that are eventually incorporated, like the heels on the boots, are incorporated with the Justice League suit. And then here we are 50 years from now, whenever now is, and those elements have now fully been incorporated here. Terry's got the gigantic long ears, he's got the heels on the boots, but then we've also done its own thing with the way it works. Yeah, it's, again, I think we have the advantage of looking back almost 30 years from when this debuted and say, boy, they knew what they were doing. But I think in some ways it's like, you listen to what they said, and they didn't necessarily have the confidence that this was going to work. It did. They were geniuses at maybe without even realizing it, I think, at the time. And now look at the impact. I was thinking today, because there's a new Batman Beyond Japanese import figure that's on all the socials right now that people are super excited about. And that's being released. And I was looking at the figure, and it's based on his comic appearance from what I can tell, but the comic appearance is so close to what this original design was for the show, it's almost indistinguishable. So that this character has not gone through the normal, like most superheroes go through quite the evolution, even if it's little things here or there. the big three, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, have had multiple different looks over the entirety of their existence. And granted, it's 50 years longer or 60 years longer than Batman Beyond has existed. But they had quite the bit of evolution in the way they looked in the first like 10 years of their existence. Meanwhile, this design really has not changed in any sort of form in the comics or in when it was brought into DC main continuity either. It has largely remained the same, with the exception of maybe a belt change here or there, or maybe a stripe here or there that was included a few times. But yeah, I think that also says a lot about the simple nature of this design is so perfect that it's really hard to change anything about it.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, yeah, certainly a few times I remember. I think one of the Arkham games has sort of a Arkhamized version of the Batman Beyond suit in it that's I don't have much love for, and I think there's maybe some of the more recent comics they'll do, like to your point, they'll do little tweaks to it, but I think you really can't, you just can't improve on that. It's too iconic. It's as iconic, if I may say, it's as iconic as the regular Batman suit is in and of itself. So yeah, just an incredible work, an incredibly inspired choice to go with such a minimalist approach, and how much that red bat pops off the screen in all of these action sequences is so cool. Yeah, just an awesome job. We get our look at the new batarangs and some of the other, like you said, some of the other tech of the suit as well, though we don't get all of it in this first episode. But yeah, I think it's such a home run. And then you get some of the more dramatic elements, the reveal of Blight. It's funny, I think maybe we touched on this in passing, Cal, but one of the things that we realized in researching or re-researching this show is how much the sort of monochromatic color palettes came into play across this series, especially in this first season.
Yeah, I think you see it kind of throughout, depending on what the scene sequence is. I mean, some of the ones that are probably standouts for the series as a whole, or when they go to the nightclubs and they're, Terry and Dana are dancing, or there's a sequence I think in the Ink episode where they're out at like whatever that hockey, lacrosse, football combination sport is that they go to, the anti-gravity sport that they're watching. They're sitting in the stands there, and it's all shaded in blue. But yeah, in this episode, we briefly touched on it last week, that sequence where Terry and his mom are really he's breaking down and sharing how he regrets the way that his last conversation with his dad went. And that whole sequence is it's all monochromatic in blue. Like it's just all blue, which obviously reflects the sadness and the down state of that entire conversation that they're having. And then we see it again brought back here in this final sequence with Derek Powers, and obviously the sequence that he's talking with these scientists that are in these gigantic hazmat suits, and they're talking to him, and the whole room is bathed in this yellow glow from the radiation that they're obviously feeding into Powers to keep the radiation at bay. And then to emphasize what the side effects are when he's not completely bathed in this radiation, the scientist tells them to shut the lights off. So initially you get this kind of, again, this dark blue hue that everything is bathed in, with, of course, the standout you just see from behind this green silhouette of green glowing silhouette of Derek Powers. But then there's this beautiful shot, and I'm sure, knowing how much of a fan Bruce Timm is of old pulp comic strips, and obviously the rest of the people that worked on this show, and how those old pulp comics and horror comics kind of are in the DNA of all of the artists that ended up working on these shows. There's this really, really great shot where they cut back to the scientist as you start to hear the laughter of Derek Powers come in, and he's just wide-eyed, and you can only pretty much see nose up to his eyes in this hazmat suit, and his eyes are wide. It reminded me, it's like the reveal of Frankenstein's monster or something like that, or something you would see in an old old an old Hollywood movie of someone being shocked that even though they knew it was coming, they're horrified at what they're seeing. And then the cut to and he's bathed completely in gray, like it's just gray at that point. So we go from blue to gray, and then we shoot back to the mirror where we see Powers just from behind with his glowing green, which completely, of course, contrasts with everything else that's just bathed in this gray. And then, of course, the reveal of his face is this glowing skeleton as he turns towards the camera and walks through it. Yeah, just a really neat choice there, and I think that's something that really defines this series, is having so many of those scenes and being willing to do that, where Batman the Animated Series, of course, is defined by the dark deco and the drawing on the dark paper and making everything dark, dark, dark. I think Beyond's look really is set apart in a lot of ways by some of these scenes that are either 2 or 3 colors only, or in this case, 2 colors of just black and then another singular color that it's bathed in. And I think that really adds to the visual of the sequence. It really draws your eye to a lot of the different things that are there, but also allows you to focus, of course, on this green glowing man. Is like, all right, everything else is just kind of normal here if you're looking at it, but then here's this nuclear waste man who's standing here in the middle, glowing green from all the radiation that he needed to survive. So yeah, those sequences are really interesting to me. So as we go back and review maybe some of these other Beyond episodes in the future, it'll be interesting to see when or if more of these sequences pop up, because like I said, I do remember a few other ones that stand out in my memory, but I do think that ends up being a hallmark here, at least early on, for this series, being willing to kind of go out on a limb there and make kind of a bold move with that decision with coloring for a sequence.
Absolutely, yeah. It's so striking. A lot of different places. Like you said, Terry's room has that blue color. The Batcave has that purple color kind of over everything, which they maintain for the rest of the show. And yeah, I think they talked about, we may have mentioned it in part one, the idea to sort of just have a lot of the backgrounds, especially in the school or in crowd scenes, just have all of the people be in sort of monochromatic clothing, even so that your main characters stand out a bit more against the backgrounds. So some really fun color palette choices as well across this series as well. So yeah, I mean, gosh, this is, again, it's so strong and it's so visually striking. We just talked about it. Plus it's the pilot, so you can throw in extra thumbs up for the title sequences and the design choices themselves. Man, it's hard to imagine that I would have given this anything but a 10, but I'm guessing I didn't.
You did not, yeah, but you still ranked it higher. You gave it as close to a 10 as you possibly could without giving it a 10. You gave it a 9. So that's splitting hairs. I think that's okay. Like that, if you look at the first half of the show, there's not as much Batman in it. So maybe, and not as much action. Obviously, it's backloaded with the action, as we talked about. So I think I would forgive that. I don't know if I would forgive myself for giving it an 8, because I think about that. It's like, oh, this is good. This is good. Not great, but good. Like that's what an 8 is to me. Whereas a 10 is like, yeah, this is outstanding. And obviously I just verbally guffawed all over the visuals there for a little bit. A couple other minor things that I really enjoyed or kind of stood out. We get blood, which we don't always see blood. We saw blood in part 1 also, but we see blood in part 2 here, where Terry bleeds. So Batman bleeds twice in this full production here. First Bruce is Batman, and now Terry as Batman gets to bleed. And the shot of Mr. Fix getting electrocuted when his electrified brass knuckles he gets pushed back into the controls. I always love that sequence for whatever reason. It reminds me so much, like that would definitely be something in a video game that you had to like knock the boss back into something to get him electrocuted, and I could see him making that same position. But the way that his arms go, that I think this was also a sequence that was used so often in the promos that you talked about, not only just the I am Batman, but Terry fighting Mr. Fix, just because he's such an imposing large character standing over top of Terry. But that whole fight sequence is pretty brutal too. I love how Terry enters the ship yanks the guys out and throws them in the water, and then he runs in and kicks the chair and flips the pilot's chair around. I love that sequence. And then he gets thrown almost through the front glass by Mr. Fix. You see him hit the glass and the glass begin to break. That whole sequence is great, and it is a pretty violent episode. We do see a lot of fist to face. We see a lot of what I think we could expect to come with some of the violence in this show, which I feel like is even more escalated than we see in the new Batman Adventures, which again, you're skewing towards a younger audience. It's interesting that the standards and practices didn't have more to say about the violence here. We do get some of the classic ways to kind of hide some of the more brutal moments, which, you know, Terry getting the tar beat out of him, and you cut back to Bruce in the cave kind of pondering on whether he's going to turn the suit on. But again, I think the theater of the mind plays so well with that, where you get to imagine on your own, like, what's the violence being done to Terry in this sequence, which is a neat little trick there to both meet the BS&P you know, demands while also inferring violence, which is I know we've talked about that with Dan Rebo before. So yeah, visually I'm sad that I gave it an 8, because I think I would probably be at a 9 if not a 10 if I had to rescore it today. But alas, we cannot change the scores because we made that also a rule at some point.
Absolutely, we are. As we say, we are adhering to the rules we made up for ourselves. So, yes, with that, we will move on to music. Once again, Michael McQuistion, responsible for our music, and of course, Christopher Carter, responsible for the Beyond main title sequence theme. Yeah, I think there's maybe a little less. I had less in my music notes compared to part 1 for sure. But it is what I think it's unique because it's the pilot episodes, so you didn't necessarily know what a big action sequence, you know, multi-minute long action sequence was going to sound like in this show yet. You know, when you listen to it now, especially after us having reviewed the whole series and coming back to this with sort of a more deep dive eye, you're like, oh, this feels like standard fare for a Beyond action sequence, very very heavily bass and drum, you know, driven with that, you know, with that those shrieking guitars coming in at certain points. That being said, I do think for, you know, for the first episode, or the second episode technically of the series, it does still, you know, they're still establishing the tone of the series, so it was an old hat at the time for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think the standout sequences, I think that I had noted specifically were when Bruce looks outside and sees Ace barking, and I know we never know where to plug in sound design, but we have 2 things I think here that kind of fit in with the music. So I know you had an interesting tidbit about Ace that we can mention, but when he looks out the window and sees Ace barking, and then you cut back to Bruce after Bruce throws the batarang, and you cut back to Bruce where he's kind of realizing, kind of putting the puzzle together as to why Ace may have been tied up, and he starts heading right towards the Batcave, and we get the build to the reveal that the bat suit is gone. There's some nice keys that get played there in that kind of build up that tension there. But yeah, interesting note, by the way, about Ace, huh?
Yeah, actually, so they mentioned, I think on the commentary, and maybe mentioned a few times, but the sound designer of the series, that was a man named Rob Hargreaves, I should say. That is his actual dog. Apparently, he spent a lot of time in the backyard leading up to the show coming out, getting his dog all riled up and barking in order to get these signs. They promised no animals were harmed in the making of this cartoon, but yes, indeed, that is unlike you expect to see, as we've talked about quite a few times over the years. You expect to see Frank Welker or D. Bradley Baker or one of those guys that is known for sort of crafting the animal sounds in episodes. You expect to see their name in credits whenever there's a dog on screen, but in fact, no, we have an actual real life dog at the time that provided the backing track for Ace. So you have authentic dog bark noises from a real dog, one of the sound designers' dog, which I thought was just a great tidbit there, as opposed to just using a sound library. And it's funny, when you watch these shows for long enough, you do pick up on like the same sound of like the same cat meows, the same dog bark. So the fact that they went in and got like a bunch of new sounds from one of their dogs is, I think, a real strong commitment as to the sound design and to doing something a bit unique, and wanting Ace to have a very unique sound. And as we talked about last week, how much atmosphere and Ace in and of himself has a certain character to him, and the bark is very iconic part of it.
Yeah, and it's so good. My actual dog Mercy thought like she's attentive to watch television, but cartoons usually are not of interest to her. But when she heard Ace bark, she was full attention, ready to go through the television screen. Like she was like, "That dog's mad, and I'm gonna fight him." So great job, sound designer's dog. You definitely came through as an authentic dog with that bark. So. Yeah, great job with that Ace sound effect. The other sound design thing I'll talk about here in just a second, but yeah, I think that leads to the sequence where we cut to Terry flying as Batman in the suit for the first time, and there's this really memorable moment. And again, this is something that has stuck out to me. I remember specific sequences from this particular movie, episodes, whatever you want to call it, that stick out to me. And one is after he lands on the roof sort of awkwardly and is able to maneuver up onto the ledge, he takes off and we see him gliding, and there's this pan that goes from the top of him and he's kind of swooping down, and it pans from the top of his head down to the bottoms of the boots where you see the boosters engage, and there's this real subtle kind of like it's just kind of ethereal and mood setting for the sequence there. It's just real chill. Like it just feels like somebody's kind of floating through the air, which matches what Batman's doing at that point. Now he's got the hang of flying a little bit, and he realizes, oh, the suit has this little ability to give me more oomph. That way I'm not just like landing on the edge of buildings and crushing my sternum. But I love that sequence. It's real chill, and the visual matching it of Batman flying by and then the boots engage, and you kind of get this really neat soundtrack behind it. I love that. The next musical piece that I had comes when, of course, when he starts engaging with the security team, both when he's on the building and then he's being chased through the entire Wayne Powers building, and then ultimately when he's spotted again, when he gets down into the dock, the loading dock. There's a really memorable kind of just, and I feel like it's one that they would go back to a little bit. It's just kind of like it's guitar and drums, and it again, it sets the tone, as you kind of mentioned, for what the show would be. And then what I like about that is then in the middle of that, this is where the sound design piece comes in, but there's this really interesting bit where he hurls the canister of nerve gas at Powers, and then Powers shoots it, and then it explodes, and there's this screeching yell of a child that comes out as the gas begins to escape the canister. And I was so haunted by this. I was like, am I hearing things? Is that supposed to be like a high pitched noise of the gas escaping? And I think it is, like, that's what it's meant to be. But they chose this screaming child sound effect to kind of really drive home the fact that this is the end of this character. Like, this is terrifying. This is nerve gas coming at you point blank in high volume. And it's a really interesting choice, I feel like. But I picked that up in here in watching this. I'd never heard that before. But then after the nerve gas is released and Batman flies away, the next sequence takes that same musical piece and it speeds it up. It's like 2.5 times almost, and it's much more frantic. It's much faster played, and that creates more energy, I feel like, in that sequence between Mr. Fix and Batman. And I'd be remiss not to mention, of course, the final sequences here where we pick up, and this was, I think, ultimately, as we discussed last week, why I gave music a 5 out of 10, is we get this really weird Linger by the Cranberries type instrumental song played in the background. of with an acoustic guitar and some drums. Like, I swore, like, this is the intro to Linger. Like, do you have to let it linger? Like, I was convinced at that point, like, this is supposed to sound like the Cranberries. And we know early on here, I think they were definitely experimenting with what some of the music was going to be. But it does feel like a weird juxtaposition from the hard rock and the percussion. And I know that this is supposed to be a lighter scene. It just does kind of stand out in a very weird way. I don't know that it necessarily works completely. Still don't love it. Maybe don't hate it, but don't love it for the sequence. But I do love is the transition from that piece into when they shake hands and we get this kind of this piece that really crescendos and comes behind them. It's really it's a little bit haunting. Like, you don't know what you just got yourself into, but also like this triumphant agreement between these two parties is reaching this. All right, the new Batman has been crowned, and it's just a really awesome piece that kind of to wrap that up. And I do like that we only hear that acoustic guitar for a little bit before it crescendos into this really memorable piece.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's kind of used as this like little lull in the story as we get this scene of them sort of describing again in this coded language what their new relationship will be. It's pretty great. Yeah. Again, I know we had maybe we different opinions at the time. I think my music would probably be again, especially on this since we're scoring these together. Technically, part one is just so strong and brings in so many elements and we talked about the use of piano in that first part, and then some of the other instruments. It's not all just drums and electric guitars. They really get deep in their bag, so to speak, in this one. So, I would probably be close to somewhere between a 9 and a 10. I'd have to say for this episode if we were rescoring it today.
Yeah, your 7 isn't that far off. Mine, however, I would be jumping probably to an 8 at least. Maybe a 9 also. So my jump from a 5 is a lot larger of a jump. So yeah, I think you have a lot less to be embarrassed about than I do. But I really apparently the acoustic song just the Cranberries. I'm not a fan of the Cranberries apparently. So sorry if you're a Cranberries fan and tuned in. But yeah, I still would not begrudgingly, if I was rescoring, would not hold that against this episode. I'd probably give it I'll say an 8 just for being less of a jump than my original 5, but still pretty wide chasm there.
Absolutely. And with that, Cal, we will get to our final category of the day, that being, of course, voice acting. A lot of the same actors we talked about last week, but we could talk about them perhaps a bit in more depth in this week's episode. A slightly smaller cast than part one.
Yeah, IMDb's page for this one way shorter. Of course, we didn't have a bunch of the supporting cast actors and actresses in this one. It is pretty straightforward. So, in small roles, we have Philip Maurice Hayes, also known as Phil Hayes, and he plays one of the guards. I think he's done a lot of voice work from his IMDb page, been working since the late 80s. He had other minor roles, very minor roles in New Batman Adventures, Superman the Animated Series. I saw a couple of other credits there as other voices or guard. So he's in a small role here. We also have John Rubano, who's playing the voice of the reporter here. He's another one who has a lot of voice acting credits to his name and was also featured in other DCAU shows in very small roles as well. Then, of course, we have briefly Terry Garr, the late Terry Garr, once again reprising her role as Mary McGinnis. She doesn't have a ton to do, but she, of course, welcomes Bruce Wayne to the McGinnis household and seemingly has to act a little shocked that her mild-mannered son should happen to know the legendary Bruce Wayne, which I love. She's a little bit taken aback by this. So, again, not a whole bunch for her to do in this episode, especially compared to the kind of the heavier scene that she played a part in part one. But overall, if we're looking at both parts together, I think Miss Gar's introduction here is fine as Terry's mom. I buy her as a mom character here.
Absolutely, yeah. She's so excited. She has that very excitable quality to her voice when she's telling him that Bruce Wayne is here, and is, in a very mom way, is being like, Mr. Wayne's very important. Like he's like very subtly just being like, hey, I know you're kind of a screw up. Don't you know? Don't mess this up. This is a big opportunity for you. Like there's a very mom quality to the way that she, even though it's only a few lines, I think in this one, that the way that it's kind of subtle, but as much as she's complimenting Bruce, she's also like trying to get through to Terry of like, hey, this could be really good for you. So don't be a jerk here.
Right. Absolutely. And almost as few lines as Miss Gar had in this episode, would almost not be worthy to be talked about or dwelled on for very long if it was not for who the voice actor themselves was. But providing the voice of our Kasnian Minister of Commerce, Vilmos Egans, is the legendary greatest of all time, Corey Burton. Playing the role of this Eastern European sort of stand-in for whatever boogeyman you want to call him. He's doesn't have a lot to do. He's got one brief interaction where he's clearly playing the slimy Minister of I love that they made up a position, the Minister of Commerce. What do you think that does? Just importing, exporting like George Costanza, or what?
I guess so. Yeah, it's like the director of money. Like
That's
it's
right. Yeah,
generic
he doesn't have a ton to do, but always great to hear Mr. Burton make an appearance. And his Eastern European accent, unsurprisingly, I bought it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always fun to hear him pop up, and yeah, he does a good job as the sinister foreign, vaguely Russian but not Russian foreign government representative.
There you go. And then, of course, also, as we mentioned last week, despite his physical on-screen appearances appearing quite important, and the fact that he's featured heavily in the promotional material for this movie when it was debuted, he doesn't end up with a ton of lines. I think maybe 4 lines total, more lines in part 2 than he had in part 1, I believe. But as Mr. Fix, Derek Powers' quote unquote assistant, but more like his physical heavy and physical enforcer, we have the legendary George Takei, or Takai if you prefer. And of course, as we talked about last week, Mr. Takai, famously a Star Trek, Mr. Zulu on Star Trek, and has done years and decades worth of acting since then in small and large roles. But not a ton, as we mentioned last week, for such a legendary actor to do. But I think it's still a pretty neat footnote that he gets to play somebody in the DCAU, and as a recognizable actor, I think the lines that he has leave you wanting more almost.
Absolutely, yeah. He's we'll get to it in our question of the week soon here, but yeah, it does make you wish perhaps we could have heard him flex his vocal muscles a little bit more. He has a certain sinister presence to him, certainly, but yeah, we don't really get a much of a sense of who he is, other than just being the fixer, if you will, for Derek Powers in the mafia mob boss sort of sense. But yeah, he's certainly imposing, and he has that sort of deep voice that just has that sort of sinister undertone to it. But yeah, you do wish that he got a little bit more to do. But yeah, he does a solid job with what's given to him.
With that said, I think he has one of, if not the most memorable line from a non-Batman or Bruce Wayne character. You could argue that from the entire Batman Beyond run, which is, as you mentioned, due in part because of how many promotional packages reused the line, but it was even used later on, I think, when Batman Beyond started airing on Toonami, and it's just a really great, memorable line that introduces this generation's Batman. As he says, as you mentioned, you're pretty strong for some clown who thinks he's Batman. And then, of course, we get a retort from our Batman that we'll talk about here in a little bit. But yeah, some good stuff from Mr. Takai. And then playing his boss as we mentioned in part one, we have Sherman Howard, who's playing Derek Powers. We talked a little bit about Mr. Howard's performances, legendarily playing, maybe not so legendarily, but formerly playing, he played Lex Luthor, as you mentioned, in the Superboy television show in the late 80s, and then just missed out. Lost out to Clancy Brown in the casting for Lex Luthor in Superman the Animated Series, but has had quite the career himself, playing in movies like Day of the Dead and shows like Seinfeld and Lethal Weapon. So yeah, Mr. Sherman Howard in this episode really to me gets to shine for multiple reasons. We really get the sense, I feel like, of the sleaziness of him, especially when that sequence where he and Mr. Fix corner Terry to try and get the evidence from him. The one-liner that he gives about Terry's dad not being around anymore is it's such a knife to the heart and so cutting and so brutal, but it's done in such a subtle way. Like the line, your dad's not around anymore, it's like, oh, that's so gross. Oh man, that's so evil. But not done in like a Saturday morning cartoon kind of way, which I love. So that's great. And then of course the sequence where he finds out, you only hear his side of the call, but the security agent calling over and saying that Batman is infiltrated the Wayne Powers tower, and his incredulous response of Batman, and then he looks over at Mr. Fix and starts laughing.
It's Powers. What's going on? Batman.
Or some guy dressed like him. We're cutting him off. Shouldn't be a problem.
Batman.
Right. Like it's great. And then of course, ultimately at the end, where we get him turning into, exposed to the nerve gas, and he's got to scream like in terror for help to his security guards as they back away. And then of course you mentioned it, the finale of it all, as he looks in the mirror after screaming at them, demanding them the scientists or the doctors tell him what the end result was of the high exposure to radiation, and him giving this evil laugh as he looks in the mirror. Mr. Howard, I feel like, knocked it out of the park for this episode and really set the tone for what this character would be for the show.
Absolutely, yeah. He's so sinister, and to the point that when he's threatening Terry, as you mentioned that first scene, he's so relaxed in how he speaks. Similarly to when he's showing the photos of what this nerve gas does to people, he's so casual and callous in how he speaks, where it's so clear that he just views, everything, every person is just a means to him, getting what he wants, more power, more money, whatever it is. And it's almost, he barely even acknowledges that what he's doing is like threatening or sinister, because it's so second nature to him. And that makes it almost, again, it's that type of guy is almost more terrifying and more unsettling than the crazy guy yelling and screaming that he's going to kill you or whatever. There's something to that, the casual nature to which he threatens Terry and speaks about death and what this nerve gas could do to opposing armies if he sells it to Kaznia and all that. He's so callous in his way of speaking. It's really tremendous.
Yeah, he is fantastic, and I feel like this episode he has so many different emotions that he has to show off, from being the cool, calm, and collected to the maniacal, insane supervillain at the end. It really is. I mean, we keep saying Spider-Man's in the DNA, but it really is a great Norman Osborn pastiche here, or homage of keeping it cool and calm and collected. And we see that later on, as he has to even further cover up the fact that he now has this glowing green skin. But then some of the interactions that he ultimately has with Batman or Victor Freeze later on really get to show that evil side of him and that vicious side of him. So yeah, great stuff from Mr. Howard. And then of course that leaves our Batman, or in this case, Batman and Bruce Wayne, as we have Kevin Conroy, once again, the late, great Kevin Conroy as Bruce Wayne. And this one, we do get to see him mellow out a little bit, but I think We still are very much dealing with, at least for the first half of this episode, the angry Bruce, the kind of, as we alluded to it in the last episode, the angry old man who's shut in and has no friends and doesn't want any friends, only wants to just be left alone with his dog in his house and kind of deal with the repercussions of the life that he's chosen to live. And here we do get to see he's furious with Terry stealing the suit, so he's obviously yelling at him a whole bunch. I do like though that after the appeal, we don't get a verbal response from Bruce, but there is something in the way that Kevin Conroy decided, like his tone changes after Terry appeals to Bruce about the death of his parents. He softens ever so slightly. He's still stern with him. He's still demanding that he brings the suit back, but it's like something shifted in Bruce's head and his heart at that point to say he sees a little bit of himself in Terry. And Kevin Conroy's performance, I feel like, directly reflects that shift there in the tone that he continues to carry until we all the way to the end of the episode, where we get him kind of being subtly joking and speaking in code to Terry about how he's blowing him up in front of his mom, like talking about how great he was and how he's such a nice boy and he wouldn't take any thanks for stopping these hooligans that shook him down, like really making Terry appear like a good kid to his mom, which obviously is going to help Terry long term. But yeah, it's pretty funny, the subtlety to some of the tonal changes that Mr. Conroy did here, and I think again speaks to the level of understanding that he had when whatever the task was when it came to communicating what was happening with this Bruce character. Kevin Conroy was in lockstep with whatever that was and could emote that with his performance.
Yeah, absolutely. There are, to your point, so many different emotions he has to portray, and there's this sort of righteous when he tells Terry, like, you had no right to take this suit. Like he does, he feels like he's almost been, because, and as we go along in this series, and as we had well established in BTOS and the new Batman adventures, Batman and Bruce aren't separate things. He calls himself Batman. He is, he's both. And so it does probably feel a little bit like he's been robbed of some of his self, even though it's just the suit.
Right.
So you feel that sort of almost desperation to bring it back. That's not yours. It's mine.
Right.
Just the idea of someone else wearing that suit is galling to him. And then, it's funny because as we've noted when we started to review the new Batman adventures, he had been told to kind of ditch the Bruce Wayne voice that he used in BTOS, the sort of higher pitched, laissez-faire playboy voice. And here we kind of get the old man version of that when he's talking to Terry's mom, which I think is really fun. You do hear him, even though it's still low and gravelly, you hear him, just the way he's enunciating certain words very much invokes that old Bruce Wayne voice he used to use in the original Batman the Animated Series. And then just the very subtle shift when he goes, there, very well, Mr. McGinnis, welcome to my world, and it drops back down into his true voice, his true, Bruce Wayne Batman voice in that moment. It's very nice and subtle, but it's there. So yeah, unsurprisingly, but again, for the new series, and knowing that, using the same actor, not recasting, later on when Superman shows up, they did go a different way with the actor, whether that was a scheduling choice or not. They chose to have someone else voice an older Superman. So it's, knowing that Kevin had so much, such a great ability to adjust his voice to reflect the 50-ish years that had passed between his regular Batman and this older Bruce Wayne. It's really spectacular. Like, just again, the little subtle notes that he is able to play with in this one.
Yeah, absolutely. We could talk about Kevin Conroy all day, I think, but we will, for the sake of time here, move on to talk about this show's Batman, officially Batman by the end of the episode, and that, of course, is Will Friedle playing Terry McGinnis and ultimately Batman. And this one is, we get Terry skulking around a little bit, but it is a lot more Terry interacting with Bruce in the suit, as we talked about already. Once Bruce starts demanding things, Terry gets a little bit arrogant and starts taunting, so we see a little bit of the swagger in this Batman. And as I mentioned when we were recapping the plot here, this Batman likes to use quips and talk back to the people that he's interacting with that are trying to kill him. So we already have a differentiation here between our Batmen. This one is younger. He's a little bit more mouthy. To continue to go back to the well here, he's got a little bit of Spider-Man in him, that he's not afraid to talk to his villains or the people that he's fighting with here. So we do immediately see that when he's in the suit. I like that he feels confident in it. We do have that brief moment where he has to appeal to Bruce, and I feel like, as the performance goes, he has a little bit of the Batman voice. I don't know if we've talked about that because obviously he didn't wear the suit last week, but he does kind of deepen his voice a little bit and put like a little bit of strain on the way that he talks when he's got the suit on, which we love, is authentically Batman, especially DCAU Batman here, as we talked about the differentiation between our happy-go-lucky Terry and then our intimidating and quippy Batman. But yeah, him appealing to Bruce in that moment to turn the suit back on so that he doesn't get killed by these security guards, I think is a great moment. And then later on, moments later, when he has to appeal to him through the death of his own father, mentioning that he's done research on Bruce and knows his history and wants to have the option to go take his own dad's killer down. I think that's a great moment there. And then, of course, though the standout, as we alluded to with George Takei as Mr. Fix, is the "I am Batman." He gets to do it. Like, he gets to say the line that, there's probably only a handful of people in history that, in recorded history, like as far as performances are concerned, across media, that have actually got to say that line. And this is Will Friedle's first opportunity to do it. And it was so good that, as we said, it was used in almost every promo for Batman Beyond for the first couple of years that was on Kids WB. And then once it moved to Toonami, the same thing happened on Cartoon Network. So yeah, hard to say that he didn't knock that out of the park.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, again, just the subtle difference in his Batman voice and his Terry voice is great. But yeah, the quite iconic "I am Batman." Every Batman actor gets to say it once, I think, at least once. So glad that Mr. Friedle gets to add his name to that's illustrious list of both live action and animation actors that have gotten to do that. So yeah, he's quite good. And again, I think I love the subtle coded conversation between him and Bruce at the end of the episode is quite a bit of fun as well. So yeah, across the two parts, Mr. Friedle does an exemplary job.
Yeah, and so I definitely would not be changing my score, which I originally gave a 10. It would stay a 10 for me. I think up and down, both parts, I think, deserve the highest of highs here. We only go up from here with the continued chemistry between our two leads. That's something I think we've touched on throughout the years, but I think the fact that Will Friedle and Kevin Conroy clearly had the chemistry to be able to feed energy off of each other. It was so integral to this series being a success. Like, to have Batman or Bruce as the older, wiser voice to speak to this younger, more fun-oriented Batman is a great juxtaposition. Not only does it tie it to the old series, but it just creates this really awesome dynamic. And I think if you didn't have that chemistry or that ability to really feed off of each other's emotions and really deliver those lines in a meaningful way, this show would not have gone past season one. So the fact that they're on screen, or sorry, their vocal performances, not only individually, are very strong, but in their interactions, which is so much of what this show is, really leads you to believe this is a father-son pardon my borrowing of the colloquialism there, but a father-son style relationship here really, I think, adds to the legendary nature of this show. So yeah, great stuff from our voice cast here. I gave it a 10. I'm sticking with a 10. You gave it an 8 originally.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd go higher. I'd go with the perfect 10 if I were rescoring it these days. But alas,
Alas.
we can't change our scores even if we really, really want to, which I think there's at least a couple in the air today for both of us that we wish we could have back, but that is not the case with these re-reviews. But it has in fact been a great deal of fun revisiting these pilot episodes, especially things like Derek Powers and Mr. Fix as the villains of that piece, which leads us towards the end of the show where we will remind everyone the best ways to support us, and we thank you for doing it so whenever you have the chance to. And of course, the best way to support us financially is, as mentioned, through buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review. And in fact, we have a listener question this week from our good buddy Zach, and his question reads as such.
How would you feel if there had been an episode in season 2 or 3 where Mr. Fix and Blight returned? Fix seeking revenge against Batman and Blight seeking revenge against Paxton. Is that something you would think is better than just leaving both of their fates unknown? I'll let you go first.
Yeah, definitely yes to Blight. I think that's an unearthed missed opportunity, perhaps. Paxton Powers really doesn't exist, almost barely exists. I think he comes back for maybe one or two more episodes after that season 1 finale. So he's really kind of a non-factor, and part of that is probably the directive that they had to, make it more of a high school centric show after that first season. But yeah, I would have liked to seen anything more with him and sort of him get any kind of real comeuppance and how he is as a mover and shaker in this corporate, mafioso type role that his father had inhabited for so many years. It may have been interesting. So yeah, Blight coming back for revenge as part of a plot against Paxton could have been quite interesting, and I would have liked to see that. Mr. Fix, I'm less sure of. I mean, it's a really cool design, and obviously you have the fact that he's the guy who actually pulled the trigger on Terry's father, so to speak. So I guess there's a more personal distaste for him, maybe. But I don't know. Really, at the end of the day, Derek Powers is the one who killed Terry's father, and that is kind of resolved in the series. So I would like to see yes. So if I can answer yes and no, I would say yes to Blight. But Mr. Fix, I'm kind of okay with just leaving at the bottom of whatever river that is.
Yeah, I do think, again, I think there's a couple of factors that lead me, and maybe Zach was kind of hinting at this being the first episode, as you mentioned, also the fact that he's technically the person that killed Terry's dad. There's feels like something that's left open there. We so often see characters who seemingly die in comics are brought back, and especially ones like this where it's the killer. And how many stories have been told of when Batman finally gets to face Joe Chill, or whoever the nameless thug is that killed his parents, and he finally comes face to face with who the killer is. Like, that's always something that I feel like that they've played with. So the fact that this was such a final ending for this character does feel like it could have been brought back. I don't necessarily think that I needed it, but I also don't think I would have hated it. I would have liked to have seen an explanation. Also, he was exposed to the nerve gas too. Did that get nullified because it went in the water, or is he like like how does that happen? Because we see the canisters exploding in front of his face. So if the water didn't get him, the nerve gas would have gotten him. So he would have would he been like the big brother of Blight? Like, he also got radiation treatment, so he's a bigger, musclier skeleton man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with it. I do think it's a little weird because of how many antagonist we see ultimately come back from the, apparent death to eventually show back up that it never did happen. But I think I think we even talked about this in the very sad ending of Blight on the submarine eating a sandwich. Like, that's the ending of that character in that episode. He goes nuclear in the sub, and that's the supposed end. Meanwhile, his son continues on. We know, obviously, them being inspired by the Norman and Harry Osborn relationship. How often in the comics Norman came back, and even when he wasn't actually physically alive, his ghost, so to speak, sort of haunted Harry Osborn and influenced Harry's business decisions, or even in becoming Green Goblin himself, like in the movies and all of that stuff. So, I think that ultimately was money left on the table of a character who looks so striking, had such a great voice actor, as we talked about in Mr. Howard, and then had a kind of a picture perfect setup for him to return with this character, his son still being around in the universe, that it does feel a little bit like a missed opportunity. So yeah, I would have liked to have seen Blight come back as well, but alas, the best we can do is in tie-in comics, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a shame that we never got a Blight reappearance, but again, you just leave it up to your imagination, as we said, or as you mentioned, look at some of the tie-in comics or various things where that character has reappeared. But that will again bring us towards the end of the day. We thank you very much, Zach, for sending in the question. As mentioned, buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review is the best way to support us financially. You can also head to our store. There's a link in the show notes where you can pick yourself up a shirt or a mug or something. That'll also help us out. And there's plenty of free ways to support us. Follow us on all the socials at DCAU Review on Instagram and the artist formerly known as Twitter, and also some of those ancillary sites like Blue Sky as well. Mostly the Twitter and Instagram is where you're going to find us posting regularly. And of course, you can also make sure you're subscribed to us on whatever your main podcast app of choice is. Rate us 5 stars if it lets you give you a rating. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts. We'll even read those on the show and give you a shout out and maybe a little gift. And of course, you can also subscribe to our new YouTube channel, which you can find in the show notes as well. Even if you don't listen to the pod on YouTube, we would appreciate you subscribing, just because it'll help us get bumped up in those search algorithms. And we need a certain amount of subscribers before they let you monetize the channel and all that stuff. So with all that self-promotion out of the way, Cal, we have one more week in this here month of April. And since it is a month set in the DCAU's future, unfortunately, perhaps, I think that means it's time for 2 more episodes of the Zeta Project.
That is right, Liam. And this will ultimately be the penultimate review of the Zeta Project. So we do have that to celebrate, at least. And as we discussed last week, I don't think there will be too many follow-ups. I don't think re-reviews are on the table for this. Maybe a single omnibus for the entire, like a review of the actual show itself could be on the table, maybe when we are so inspired. But I would generally like to leave this show behind and maybe never think about it ever again if possible. So with that that means we will, on our penultimate episode, be tackling 2 more episodes of the Zeta Project. That's right, leading to the very exciting finale, whenever the next month that we cover the future is. And so next week, we will be covering the episodes River Rising and The Hologram Man.
Well, the stakes have certainly never been higher, let's hope, for Zeta, as we bring you yet another double feature next week. Can't wait, but until then, I'm Liam.
And I'm Cal.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Arrivederci!